They saw when they came towards him that indeed it was so. The sand on one side of him had already a stain of red soaking through. So the man was wounded as they had expected, and the sand on one side was red because of the blood. "He is wounded," Sadao exclaimed. He made haste to the man who lay motionless. So Sadao said that he is wounded, and he quickly hurried towards the motionless man, his face in the sand. The man was lying with the face in the sand, an old cap stuck to his head, soaked with sea water. He was in wet rags of garments. He was wearing a cap which was sticking to his head because of the water, because it was wet. He was in wet rags. His clothes were old and torn and wet. Sadao stopped, Hana at his side, and turned the man's head. They saw the face. Sadao turned the man so that they could see his face. "A white man," Hana whispered. Yes, it was a white man. The wet cap fell away, and there was his wet yellow hair long, as though for many weeks it had not been cut. So his cap also fell away when he turned him, and they saw wet yellow hair. That means he was blonde, which were long as though it had not been cut. His hair had not been cut for many weeks. And upon his young and tortured face was a rough yellow beard, and the man was young, and his face was full of distress, pained face, was a yellow beard. He had beard also. He was unconscious and knew nothing that they did for him. He was unconscious. He did not know what these people were doing for him. Now Sadao remembered the wound, and with his expert fingers he began to search for it. Now he was a doctor. Immediately he remembered that the man was wounded, and so his expert fingers started searching from where the blood was oozing out. Blood flowed freshly at his touch. He could feel the blood coming out freshly on his fingers. On the right side of his lower back, Sadao saw that a gun wound had been reopened. So on the right side of his lower back, there was a gun wound which was not properly healed, and it had reopened. The flesh was blackened with powder. The flesh was dark, blackened because of the gunpowder. Sometime, not many days ago, the man had been shot and had not been tended. So this showed that the man had been shot a couple of days back, and his wound had not been taken care of. It was bad chance that the rock had struck the wound, and it was unlucky for him that the rock had hit on his wound, and the wound reopened. "Oh, how he is bleeding," Hana whispered. Again in a solemn voice, Hana repeated that he is bleeding in a serious voice. The mist screened them now completely, and at this time of day no one came by. The mist was becoming very thick, and they were screened, totally covered by mist, and nobody used to come to this place at this time of the day. The fishermen had gone home, and even the chance beachcombers would have considered the day at an end. The fishermen also must have gone home after fishing. It was evening time, and the beachcombers, people who search for shells and other things on the beach to sell, they also were not there at this time. "What shall we do with this man?" Sadao muttered, but his trained hands seemed of their own will to be doing what they could to stanch the fearful bleeding. So now Sadao spoke to himself. He asked a question to himself: "What shall we do with this man?" And but his fingers continued to do what a doctor should do to stop the bleeding. He packed the wound with sea moss that strewed the beach. He plucked some seaweeds and packed those seaweeds into the wound. The man moaned with pain. in his stupor but did not awaken. The man gave a suppressed cry of pain when Sadao put the weeds in his wound, but he did not come out of his unconsciousness. The best thing that we could do would be to put him back in the sea, Sadao said, answering himself. Speaking to himself only, he thought of the answer to his question. The best thing that we could do would be to put him back in the sea. Now that the bleeding was stopped for the moment, he stood up and dusted the sand from his hands. Now the bleeding had stopped, so he got up, he stood up, and he dusted the sand from his hands. Yes, undoubtedly, that would be best, Hannah said steadily. Very firmly, Hannah also repeated the same thing. She said, undoubtedly, that would be the best. But she continued to stare down at the motionless man. But she kept on staring at the motionless man.